speaking of characters, because what it stood out to me in a big way at the studio update was there were a number of very surprising announcements, like the Handmaidens and Iden Versio. Very cool characters that are really exciting that were unexpected. We didn't see a Boba Fett announcement or anything like that. Is there any sort of like defined method for prioritizing which characters get made before others, or is it just Simone goes, please let me have Hondo, and then you do that?
Yeah, I think so. There is a method. It might be madness, and this kind of comes back to a part of the question that Kurt asked that I realized I forgot to answer, which is, eras and factions and that kind of stuff, right? One of the great things about Shatterpoint is the fact that we can kind of go anywhere and do anything, because the squad building and the strike team building, squad building has some limits. You have to build within your era, but strike teams can be composed of different eras. And that was somewhat intentional to allow us to be able to explore, some of the microcosms of the Star Wars galaxy and story that you just can't do if you have to make a full faction out of, right? If you have to have 12 releases for a thing, like you can't really make, say, a Legion faction out of the Andor show. It doesn't really work, right? So you either have to figure out where do those things slot into the other factions that exist, or you kind of have to say, we can't do it. There's not enough stuff. And it's maybe someday they'll expand on that in the universe or in the galaxy and we'll see more of it, or maybe they won't. And we can't go there. So Shatterpoint was kind of specifically designed to allow us to dip our toes into a lot of different things, without needing to have a robust amount of things to support it. Right. Like you as a player can dabble. We as a studio can dabble, and we can kind of touch a lot of different corners of the Star Wars galaxy that a different style of game or one that was more restrictive would make really difficult. And that transfers into your question, which is, how do these characters get picked? And there's a balance, right? There's the of course you're going to try to hit the most iconic names out of the gate. You want players to, there's a reason that Ahsoka Tano is in the core box, right? She's probably the most popular Star Wars character at this point in time for the vast majority of fans, right? She's instantly recognizable. She's made huge waves. Like, you would be a fool not to have that character somewhere into your introductory set. Anakin Skywalker, Asajj Ventress, Lord Maul, all of these big names, these true A-listers for Star Wars. They set the tone for the game, and they draw in a wide number of eyes. Everyone recognizes them. And I think that they're the characters that if I was like, you get to play a game and you get to control Ahsoka Tano and Anakin Skywalker, and you'll fight Lord Maul and Asajj Ventress, you'd be like, yes, this is what I want. But I do think it's really important, from just an experience and a kind of like line statement, right, to have those things that come out of left field that say, hey, we're not just playing, the top tier names you all know, right? We really want to explore the Star Wars galaxy, and having things like, Cad Bane, for example, or Hondo Anaka, they're not unknown characters by any means, but they're less known. And then you can drill down even further to things that are just like, okay, well, who would have thought that, your opening launch for the Galactic Civil War era would be Luke Skywalker, Leia as Boosh, Lando and R2-D2 in disguise, right? Like, no one probably would have picked that as the primary way to introduce the Galactic Civil War. But at the same time, it really shows the fact that A, there's a lot of different points in time that we can cover with these characters, and B, that it is playing to the idea that all of the different corners, all of the different stories can be expressed in the game. And things like the handmaidens, Padme and her handmaidens, right? Doing things that are unexpected, I think, make people excited for the potentials of the game. If you are sitting there on the Discord saying day 47 of me asking for Dirge, right? the fact that we announced before the game even released that we were going to do Queen Padme Amidala, Sabine and her handmaidens in their royal handmaiden garb, in their royal like throne room garb, says asking day in and day out for a character that you love that's kind of a deeper cut is probably not futile, right? Like we've probably had those discussions. We've probably thought about it. Or if we didn't, we're not going to throw it out of hand because it's not another Anakin Skywalker. And you know, again, that goes back to something we like to say a lot about Crisis Protocol, which is that every character is somebody's favorite. You know, somebody identifies with a character regardless of how deep a cut or not deep a cut they are. And why should we limit, you know, the scope of the game, the chances that we have to explore the Star Wars galaxy and to bring these things to the tabletop by simply saying, well, that person's not, they're not well known enough. They're not the top end. We didn't see them in a movie.
I gotta start my write-in campaign for R5D4.
See, R5D4. I mean, it's very possible. And Shatterpoint is the place where that could occur. So I think it's, you know, we don't just want players to be excited with the experience that they have. We want people to be excited with the experience, like the places we're going to go, right? With what the future experience could be. And showing people that there's not a lot of things we're afraid of, like tackling, regardless of how out of left field it can feel at sometimes, is I think it's really fun. It's really rewarding, and it kind of hopefully sets the tone for what the game wants to be, right? Like
I'm so excited about all of that. Like you said, just sitting there thinking about, oh, I bet what if they did this? What if they did that? And then just as somebody who's so engrossed in the lore, seeing deep cuts or goofy little guys that you didn't think would exist in a game really excites me.
I think it turns it from a game product into a true expression of, you know, fan love, right? Like it makes the world feel more real. Why do these kind of side characters and ancillary, like why did they give that droid on your shirt a name? Why? Because it makes the world more real, because the Star Wars galaxy is a real quote unquote world, right? And these characters exist and they are important to stories that are maybe not told yet, right? It goes back to the fact that sometimes we don't know much about a character because their story just hasn't been written, but that doesn't mean that they're not super important to the overall like will of the Force or where the Star Wars galaxy goes on the screens that we see it on. And so when you add that stuff in, I think it stops it from just feeling like a rehash of things we all know, and it becomes a robust sandbox that you can really play in and feel like you're deeply part of the mythology and the magic of Star Wars.
Yeah, it adds a lot, I think, because we definitely spend a lot of time speculating about like Legion. What if you had, I don't know, Gamorrean guards or something? And like 90% of the time we're like, well, it's not really a good fit for that type of game. It's fun to think about. What if you had the time grappler in Legion? And it's like you can't.
The hammer guy,
yeah.
Hammer guy from Andor.
Right. But like you said, for this game, it's like, you know, it could happen. Actually, maybe it could.
Yeah. 100%. You would be crazy to think the first time Dallas Kemp saw that episode, he wasn't like, dude, this guy. And I got the screenshot of like him just hammering away on the bell. And I was like, someday, maybe. Yeah, I'm not going to say no, right? Like hammers are a very effective weapon in that galaxy, as we're starting to learn. Like,
confirmed. He's coming now.
You heard it here first, everybody. Please don't make clickbait articles about that. I know how this works. That's not okay. Double question.
Mm-hmm.
What is something about Shatterpoint that you think will surprise most wargamers or hardcore wargamers or hobbyists or however you want to define them?
Mm-hmm.
And what is something about Shatterpoint that surprised you personally?
I think one of the things that's going to surprise established wargamers about Shatterpoint the first times they play it are the speed at which things move about the board, because so many so many tabletop miniatures games are all about maneuver and movement, but they're about those things because that stuff is restrictive, right? Like, I need to go to a place. How do I get to that place? My things only move so far. Shatterpoint kind of turns that on its head, and it says you can get anywhere you want, but you might not know where you want to be. So it becomes really important that things are super fast and very mobile, right? We talked about a lot of shoves and pushing and board manipulation. Where you end a movement, just because you can be anywhere on the board during your activation doesn't mean you're likely to be there when you activate again. And so I think, one of the things that I saw at a lot of the demos and some of the comments and the takeaways was just how fast everything is. Like, you can really get anywhere you want to be. But once you have that power in hand, it then becomes, how do I effectively utilize this, knowing that where I end up is probably not where I'm going to be, or maybe not where I need to be. Right. And that couples in with the randomized order deck and everything else. But it is definitely one of those things that is unlike so many other experiences in terms of just, we've all played those games where we're like, man, I just need a little bit more movement to get where I want to go. And I can't do it. So now I have to come up with a new plan. And you almost never say that in Shatterpoint because there's so much movement and everything has so many opportunities to like get where it wants to be. It's more about trying to plan ahead and then figure out what to do when that turn comes around and you're like, I need to go in two places at once. What's my best opportunity? Oftentimes I find a lot of the games come down to that moment of, I've flipped over this character and there's two different objectives that I really need them to grab. How do I make that work? Or can I make it work? And if I can't, then which one sets me up better to delay the game's conclusion so that I can come back with my next card flip and try again. And so I'm excited to see players kind of like live that. And I think it's very exciting and liberating at the start when you're so used to things not being as fast as the table. And all of a sudden, Asajj Ventress starts her turn, double Dathomirian dexterity flips, and then murders a bunch of people and repositions and jumps. And you're like, holy cow, I don't even need all this movement. It's more than I needed. It's very exciting. And then I think the thing that surprised me most about Shatterpoint, that's a great question. I think if you ask me that question in like 4 months, I'll have a really great answer about something I did not expect that surprised me about Shatterpoint is the players, as you all figure out all of the things that are meta internally, because we have a meta, every group has a meta, didn't quite galaxy brain together. My funny answer to that question, though, because I was surprised once, and it's the story that Michael Plummer always giggles when I tell it, was we had been working on Shatterpoint for quite a while, Pagani and myself, and then we brought on Michael Plummer, and we had established that he was going to take over. We were going to work him up to be the lead developer for the game. So he kind of stood into the game developer assistant role to Pagani, and he of course was playtesting a lot and everything, and we were playing and getting him kind of like in depth so he could take on that lead role. And I think it was, I don't know, I think he had been there about a month, and he and I were playing a game of Shatterpoint, and he moves his character and he's like, I'm going to use this ladder, this ingress point, to go down and place myself within an inch of the objective. And I was like, what? You can't do that. And he's like, yes, you can. You end within range 1 of an ingress point, you place at the end of the ingress point. And I was like, you're really clever. Because I had been playing for, I don't even know how long at that point, months and months. And it had never occurred to me that you could go down a ladder as well as up it. And I don't know why that was true. It's really because, there's no penalty to going down elevation. Right, there's only penalties for going up. So 9 times out of 10, I was just like, I can just hop down wherever I want. But I never made the pro gamer connection of I can get extra movement if I end at the top of the ladder and place myself within range 1 of the bottom of the ladder, and how that could change things. So that was definitely one of those early things that surprised me a lot, and I've never forgotten it. So I use it quite a bit now. I don't know if that's like the juiciest thing, but it was certainly one of the things that I remember the most about
the Plummer maneuver.
Yeah. But I got him back though because there was I think it was might have been that same game. I used Padawan Ahsoka Tano to take over 2 objective points by attacking an already wounded unit. So I attacked a wounded character. He's like, "Why are you doing this?" And I'm like, "Oh, you just wait," because I didn't want the damage. I wanted all the movement triggers on her. And so by using that, I was actually able to position in such a way that I was able to take 2 different objectives. So that was pretty great. And he was like, "Oh my gosh, this is amazing." I was like, "Yeah, it is." So I surprised him. He surprised me. You know, it was a day of surprises. It was great.
Nice.
Maybe we can check back in 4 or 5 months after everybody's digested the game fully and see
Heck yeah.
what's been spit out of the masses.
You'll be like, "What did you never intend for this game to do?" And I'll be like, "Here are 5 things." But hey, it's pretty awesome. And I've started to use them as well.
So going back to Adepticon, like Joe had asked you at the time, your favorite Shatterpoint character, and I feel like you said Dooku, or maybe Dooku was the most fun to design at least. And then like right after that, a bunch more characters were announced. So now that we know more characters in the game, does that change your answer? Do you have a favorite character you can share?
Yeah, it's really tough to be like, what's your one favorite? It's kind of like, what's your favorite song or movie? It's what mood am I in at the time? I think if we go beyond the characters that we showed at Adepticon, so Cad Bane, obviously love Cad Bane. It's very difficult to say like not Cad Bane, right? But I actually really enjoy the Padme Amidala squad. I think they do a lot of really interesting things, and it was very fun to kind of design these extremely lethal ladies in fancy formal wear, and to just know that they would look, you know, their performance and what they do on the tabletop versus the way in which they look, right? What you would expect from all these ladies in these really fancy like dresses and formal wear is like radically different. And to me, that's kind of fun. But I think like specific character wise, if it's not Cad Bane and it's not Dooku, it's probably Mace Windu. I like that character a lot. Not as much as Josh does, but I've always really liked Mace. And he was he's just a very fun design. Like he is very powerful. He kind of plays. I talk a lot about how Anakin's one of my favorite in the core set because he plays to my style, which is kind of as a frontline bruiser. You don't have to think super hard with Anakin. You know what he wants to do. He just wants to get in there and like wreck stuff. And I've always kind of liked that. And Mace plays a lot to that strength as well. He makes the forces around him very durable, and he just kind of has that. He's got that Mace swagger that I like, where it's just like your opponent sees him and they're like, "Oh Lord, he's coming." You're like, "Yeah, he is." And there's not much you can do about it.
And he's like sort of the game's namesake. Does he have a Shatterpoint ability?
He does have a Shatterpoint ability, which was one of the reasons why I told Josh that we would not name the game Shatterpoint originally, because I was like, we already put the ability on him. I'm not naming the game after an ability that a character has. That's ridiculous. And cut to the name that we proposed and had almost gotten all the way through, getting dumpstered, getting thrown in the trash because of some legal stuff. And then we went back and I was like, maybe he's not crazy. Maybe Shatterpoint is a good name and it doesn't matter that it's on Mace, and it all worked out great.
Can you
original name Star Wars 2?
Yeah, I was going to ask, can you tell us, or is that too secret?
The lawyers will come.
I would. So like, the funny thing is that I literally don't remember what the original name was. I think it was so painful at the time that my brain just blacked it out. Because it was shattering that we had gotten so far, and everyone was like, we had treatments that we had done, and like everything. And then they were like, no, you can't use it. And naming a game it's literally the worst thing that you have to do, because there's so many checks, there's so many opinions, and it's just hard. It's hard to name a
Especially a Star
game.
Wars game.
Yeah, well, and you want to pick a name that's like compelling and kind of conveys the experience. And there's lots of other things with names, between novels and movies and games, and so it's a miserable experience. I can tell you, because I do remember this, because I still call the game this from time to time, that the code name for Shatterpoint was Fulcrum.
Okay.
So that was its name forever until it became Shatterpoint. And even after the Shatterpoint name was approved, we referred to it as Fulcrum for, I think, another year after that, because, code names are
pretty
important.
appropriate name with the whole like struggle.
Yeah, it's not bad, right? But we of course went with Shatterpoint. But yeah, Fulcrum
I
was
like
the
to
name.
think, like you said, it was shattering to get that rejected. Like you were all just like, somebody said that, and then it was like light bulb moment. It's
just,
like, let's turn this misery into opportunity.
It was horrible. I think it was like, I don't even remember. I'm gonna have to go find it, because everyone always asks when I tell them the story. They're like, what was the original name? And I'm like, I literally can't remember. It was so long ago too. And you just kind of push that stuff out of your head. I can barely remember accurate rules on streams. Yeah, there's too much going on. I can't remember a name that got trashed.
Right. Yeah. Until we hear otherwise, I'm going to assume it was Masters of Terras Kasai 2.
Oh yeah, it's not bad.
Okay. Couple questions left. I think we're almost out of super serious questions. So it is today as of recording. I don't know if this will be released today. I might try. It is May the 4th, and the You Cannot Run dual pack got announced today, and I think it looks absolutely gorgeous. It's a kind of a diorama pack with Vader and Obi-Wan from the Kenobi show. And you've done similar sets like this in Crisis Protocol with like Rivals packs, I think they're called. I'm not as really into... I had to pick Legion or Crisis Protocol, so the budget only fit the one. So for people unfamiliar, can you explain the idea behind the dual packs? And are the two characters that come with the game, are these unique versions of these characters? And if so, will those versions of the characters ever be available in a different product?
Sure. So, one of the big things, right, that Atomic Mass Games does, our mission statement, our whole reason for existing, is that we make hobby miniatures games, right? Like the miniatures are just as important in terms of what we do as the games with which you play with them, right? The artistry, the hobby mentality behind it, the ability to kind of improve one's skills, not just in gameplay, but also at assembly, at painting, all that, the aspirationalness of what we get to do, creating your own collection of these incredible miniatures. I think it's what, it's what sets these games apart. It's what keeps people engaged for so long. There's more to it. There's more investment and everything about it, as a lifestyle and as a hobbyist. And so we want to take moments to celebrate those things, to kind of give players and people the opportunity to really see miniatures as the art form that they are. But also to kind of democratize that, right? Like if you go and you look at a lot of the high-end painting competitions, the folks who have poured so many hours into it and made a profession out of it, and you see these incredible works of art, and a lot of the times those are told through like these really cool dioramas, these face-offs where they take existing miniatures and they build this whole thing around them and they tell a story, and I think everyone kind of looks at it and we're in awe of it, and we say, man, I really wish that I had that on my shelf. How compelling is that? How amazing is that? But I don't know where to start, or I don't have the time, or I don't have the skill. And I think those kind of aspirational pieces, they're an important part of what makes the miniatures hobby so cool, so interesting and compelling. And we wanted to come up with a way to kind of celebrate that and to bring that into people's, collections and on their shelves in a way that, allowed everyone that experience, regardless of your level. Right. So we kind of took the idea, and implemented it in Marvel Crisis Protocol through the Rivals panels. And those were very successful. And we got a lot of good feedback from people and players on what they liked and what they wished it had done more and all of this stuff. And so when we started with Shatterpoint, we knew that that was going to be another great opportunity to kind of explore that space and to take these iconic characters and put them in a setting and give players and hobbyists the opportunity to have amazing dioramas on their shelves that also could function in game, whether as like some additional terrain. And then of course, as the characters themselves, like when you're not playing with them, you put them on the diorama and you're like, look at it. It's like this awesome collectible that is mine because I've assembled it. I've painted it. Right. There's a lot of ownership and pride there in that stuff. And so we had that always in the back of our mind that we were going to do something like we had done to give players and painters the opportunity to really explore that joy of the hobby miniatures environment. We happened to, be talking about that plan with LFL, and that's when they brought up the idea of Obi-Wan and the show that was coming, and it kind of kickstarted the whole thing. And so it was through that, kind of ideal, that goal, that we got an opportunity to do something that I don't think we would have gotten to do otherwise, because, it spoke to LFL as well. And they saw the opportunity in it and the potential in it. And so that was really cool. And the characters in the dual packs are unique characters. They have specific rules to them. So for example, Obi-Wan Kenobi is a secondary character, and his full title is Obi-Wan Out of Hiding. So it represents, Obi-Wan has just left Tatooine and he's not really at his best. He hasn't gone through his like Rocky training montage yet. So he's kind of downtrodden. He's not as powerful as he once was, and he's questioning a lot of things. So we've thought, what a great opportunity to kind of make him a lesser, standing character compared to the general Obi-Wan Kenobi that comes out in that first wave. What a fun way to kind of juxtapose and show how specific moments in a character's path can be expressed very differently and have an impact on the game, right? Because that's the other big thing is I see a lot of people are like, well, this one R2D2 could be like all the R2D2s. Like, well, it could, but what if we just made an R2D2 that was specific to the R2D2 of that moment, right? Like, or you don't want Luke Skywalker to rule them all. You want Luke Skywalker when he's the farm boy. You want him, when he's begun his Jedi training, when he's on Hoth before he goes to Dagobah. You want Dagobah, like each of those characters is different. They carry some things over with them, but their skills and who they are as a person, as their outlooks on life, the way they would approach battle and combat are all going to be very unique to them. So it was fun to be able to do that in a really like dynamic and different way. And then of course it gave us the opportunity to do a Vader. And who doesn't want to do a Darth Vader as soon as possible, because he's just so damn cool. And also do a Darth Vader that could kind of cross eras a bit and give us that opportunity to, touch on the fact that we've seen in comics and stuff that Vader did work with some of the clones very early in the organization of the Empire and right at the end of the Clone Wars and stuff. So this gives players those opportunities to tell those stories and to kind of see those things. Or like we talked about earlier, you can do Vader the Redeemed and have him team up with Jedi and say, hey, he didn't go down the dark path.
Is this Vader Republic era or Republic and Empire era? Are there multi-era units?
So both of these characters are going to be multi-era.
Oh, okay.
So
nice.
They cross the Clone Wars into the Galactic Civil War. And you will see more characters that are like this, especially when you kind of get into those gray zones where it's like, well, they're kind of, it's hard to place them. Right. And for this one, it was really exciting to be able to do because of the fact that the Obi-Wan show kind of did cross the two eras, the two main eras. We were able to do this pack and have it alongside the launch of the game, but not have these characters that just had no home, right? Like if Obi-Wan had to be Galactic Civil War, you'd be like, well, where do I put him? I'd be like, nowhere for many months. And, that's not cool. So it was neat to kind of have everything lined up so well for this to kind of be the first offering. But it's one of those things where it offers a different experience. I think it showcases a lot of what hobby miniatures games can be apart from the game itself. It celebrates the art form and the skills that we all develop as hobbyists. And then of course it adds to the game in a unique way that honestly we wouldn't have gotten to do any other way. It's one of those things where you can look at something and say, well, it could have been this, but the fact of the matter is that a lot of the ways that some things start, or the origins of things, they're the way they are because that's what they needed to be to get there. Right. And it might not be for everyone. Not everyone probably is necessarily clamoring for a diorama of these two characters on the shelf, and that's okay. Not everyone's probably clamoring for, Count Dooku, right? If you just don't like Count Dooku, that's your personal like choice and opinions, and those are totally valid and fine. But I think for the vast majority of people, especially folks who have been in the hobby for a while, these kinds of aspirational pieces become really exciting and compelling because they do open doors to grow skills, to do things that might be outside of your comfort zone in a very safe way. There's a reason, paint by numbers kits are still very popular, right? It's a great way to learn how to start doing these things and inspire you to move on to next things. As far as will the characters be available outside these things? Yeah, anything's possible. Obviously, if you look at really any of the lines, things get repackaged over the course of time. They get added to other things. Nothing's really static. I think the thing that we can say safely, obviously, is there's no plan to immediately make them available. So if they do, it will be over a longer time period. So if you just decide that these are the characters you want, then this is the way that, you can acquire them. And if it's not the way you want them, then you can wait. And, someday you might see them somewhere else, or you might not. Those are just choices that we all make as, consumers of anything. Right. So yeah. And then of course, like, the big thing of course is, well, are we going to see, like, are these just going to dominate everything? Are they always going to be like this? And again, these kind of dual packs are special releases. They're things that we do not infrequently, but we don't do a lot of them. They are somewhat time intensive and obviously more difficult than most of the normal things, because we put a lot of energy and effort into making these incredible, like, kind of set pieces. And they are special. So the kind of the thing is, if they're not your cup of tea, it's not going to be a cup that gets put in front of you very often. Right.
Right.
But for the folks that do love it, I think they're really fun. They're fun ways to show cool moments within the media and the story. They give us an opportunity to kind of delve into, again, talking about, same with characters and deep cuts and things like that. It just makes the world and the game feel more real and more like it's really into the heart and soul of the Star Wars galaxy. And so for us, they're very fun to do, and they're very exciting. And I think, I can't wait to see everybody get their hands on it, and all the people will paint them up, and you'll see all the cool photos, and there's so much potential, right? I've heard people be like, well, I'm going to do mine so that it's completely OSL, like we see in the show. So it's just gonna be red and blue. And some people are talking about adding the fire and making the little, like, gas tank thing blown up so that the fire is separating them. And there's, like, that stuff's just cool. And all of those ideas, all of those things we'll see exist because, the concept was there and we were able to do that. And I think for me, that's one of the biggest wins about the dual packs and what they can bring. And the other, I think if you're just like, well, I don't care about any of that, then the other thing that's really important to realize is that they provide an avenue to offer characters that might not work any other way.
Right. Like, I suppose the way you're packaging them, there's usually 4 to 5 characters in a box. Like, who would you put with Obi-Wan?
Yeah. Like if you wanted to do an Obi-Wan Kenobi from the show, right? What goes around him? And I think that there are things that you could do, but are those things as compelling as say the
Right.
dual pack? Again, we're getting into personal opinions and stuff.
Child Leia when?
I mean, someday, right? Like long enough timeline, I would love to get to everything.
I just really want a dual pack of like Max Rebo versus Figrin Dan or something, like a music.
Yeah, a little battle of the bands.
Yeah.
I'm in. We'll make that 100%.
Confirmed.
We'll just do the Max Rebo band versus the friggin' D's, and like we got it. I would love that.
I have 2 things that are mostly just to indulge myself.
That's what I'm here for.
So back at Adepticon, when we were demoing the game before the studio update, I had mentioned that I desperately needed Chopper to be in this game.
Mm-hmm.
And then, before the weekend was over, Chopper got announced for the game.
It did.
Keeping that sequence of events in mind, I just also want to say I really need Cal Kestis and Marin and the characters from the Jedi Fallen Order Survivor series to be in this game. That's not a question. I'm just saying that.
Just a statement. I got it.
Statistically, based on all of my data, maybe within 3 days those will be announced. Like maybe. All of the data I have tells me that'll happen.
Yeah, it worked once, right?
Yeah, 100% of the time it worked.
Yeah. All right, well, fingers crossed. I'm pulling for you.
The other thing that's also not a question, and I know I don't want to ask about future things because I know that's not how this works, and it's annoying to just ask. I'm just going to say the words and look into your eyes as best I can over the webcam. I'm going to say High Republic, and then we move on.
Okay.
And I think we have one more question.
Yeah, so like another final question then. Just like a non-Shatterpoint question. What are some like non-AMG tabletop games that you and the team are enjoying right now? What's kind of like grabbing your interest outside of the Star Wars tabletop world,
Well, I know that the Diablo beta was huge with a lot of people. So, when June 1st rolls around, there's going to be a whole big like poll of people playing Shatterpoint and Diablo in the office. Like it's just going to be back and forth. Tabletop wise, like I think, what have we been playing recently? I've really been enjoying man, that's a tough question. I haven't had a ton. My kid's like in the middle of baseball right now, so there hasn't been a ton of time to dig in on the weekends. But we were doing a lot of Marvel Champions recently. I did bring back from Star Wars Celebration the Star Wars deck building game, and have been diving into that. Good. And that one is very fun. But you said not Star Wars, so that's kind of cheating, I guess.
We said not AMG.
Yeah, so it's not AMG technically.
That one's been really good. I've actually been enjoying Heat quite a bit, and I have promised the dev team that I will bring it in for them to play. I think that's
a Formula One game.
Yeah. It's the Formula One game. It's a really clever mix between Downforce, which is like super simple formula racing, and then Formula 1D, which is like super complex racing.
Yeah, I played Formula D, which I thought was cool, but took like 2 hours, and it was like it's too long for what you get.
It's a lot. It's you've got like no simulation versus all the simulation, and I feel like Heat kind of hits right in the middle where it's the action video game of racing, where it's like it almost feels like you're racing, but it's not. You're not so lost in the weeds that you're not just doing cool stuff. So that one's been pretty fun. And then we were playing. What did they just play in the office? They grabbed. There's always a Magic the Gathering or something going on in the office, of course, because that's just classic. It's easy to do over lunch. Yeah, so those are probably my like immediate answers right now. I'm trying to go over like what else got played, but for the most part, we're pretty open to play anything. Like somebody gets a new game and they bring it in. It's one of those fun things about working in tabletop in general, and especially in design and dev. I always let, like, whenever I do talks and stuff, I always tell people, I'm like, no one invented anything. Like, someone will tell you we invented this. They didn't. They innovated on it, right? Like, all the ingredients are there. It's really just a question of, how did you take it and do something slightly different with it? How much chipotle did you put in that mayo? And everyone has like a different level that they're willing to accept for it. But that's kind of the exciting thing. And so, being an avid, enjoyer of the media and the medium, you hear the same thing. I think I watch a lot of like directors and from Hollywood and stuff talk, and most of them, like a lot of actors too, they're voracious consumers of the medium in which they love, and then that informs like what they do. You identify things that you think are cool or you liked, or you identify things that you didn't like and you say, I would have done it this way, and it always informs the next thing you do, right? It always makes you go, okay, well, where do I go next, right? Shatterpoint is nothing but a love letter to a lot of things that I have enjoyed in past games, whether they're tabletop miniatures or board games, or solutions to things that I thought didn't get implemented well, but saw the potential in, right? And then you work in a collaborative effort and everyone's bringing these different things to it, and you go through the process, right? It's very interesting. So we never say no. And we actually have a standing once a month. Somebody from the dev team is required to bring in a game to play with everyone else.
Nice.
And we basically spend the morning, we learn how to play it from the person. And then we talk about it, and we get really deep into the philosophical weeds on it. Like, sometimes it's like, is this even a game or is it an activity?
Sure.
One of my most favorite games ever is Rattlesnake. If you've never played it,
I've
basically
never heard of it.
it's, so you get these gigantic magnetic rattlesnake eggs. They're super strong magnets. And then there's a board, and it's got a bunch of colored rattlesnakes on it. And you divide the eggs up evenly between players. I think there's 12 eggs. So 4 players, everybody gets 3 eggs. And then you roll a die, and the die tells you what color snake you have to put your egg on. So it sounds really simple, right? But as you start putting these super strong magnet eggs on these rattlesnakes, they start to attract to each other. And if you clack the eggs together or push them off the board, you have to take the eggs. The first person to get rid of all their eggs wins. It's an incredibly simple game to play. It's but everyone will play it at least 4 times in a row. Like, before they're like, okay, I've played enough, but I want to play this again.
Such a fascinating concept. I don't think I've ever heard of magnets in a board game.
Yeah. So it's a dexterity based game. It's not really like a tactical game, but it's one of the ones that's so fun to play, especially when you start talking about, like, is it a game? Is it not? Is it an activity? There are rules that define it. There's a way to win. There's strategy involved to it. There's randomness because of the dice. And those are the things that we really start to dig into. One of the worst but best discussions we ever get into is what's a tabletop miniatures game versus a board game, because the lines are so blurry now.
Am I mistaken in understanding that line is also legally important when you're dealing with the Star Wars license?
It can be. I mean,
Something with Hasbro or something.
What constitutes what can be very intriguing, right? But I let the lawyers worry about that. We mostly focus on the philosophy of, what separates it. And especially, I think that question was easier answered in the 90s, before you saw this proliferation of like really, really good looking sculpts in board games, and, all these different, like, your Descents of the world, and your Zombicides and all these things, right? Like, now it's harder to tell in some ways. So philosophically, what sets those games apart? And it gets fun because deep down in your soul that there is a difference, right? Like, if somebody says, well, Shatterpoint's just a board game, I would be like, it is not. But now I have to defend that position, and how am I going to defend it? And so we get into these really spirited debates about like what makes what and what goes where. And those they're not just academic, they're also important, because if you can come to a consensus as a group about what are the fundamental tenets of the thing that you make, right? I said before, Atomic Mass Games makes tabletop miniatures games. That's what we were created to do. That's what everyone involved at the studio does. That is our mission statement and our reason for existing within the Asmodee family. Then establishing what is a tabletop miniatures game means that you now have a focus. You have a focus for the products that we talk about, how we approach the products, like what will we do within a game line, what won't we do within a game line. And again, it's all subjective. There is no capital T truth when it comes to this stuff, but it's important that we all kind of work from the same foundation and that we consistently challenge ourselves in terms of our understanding of things, right? Like, you don't get Shatterpoint without saying, but what if you did things this way, right? What if you didn't give players control over their activation order? It's kind of a radical innovation. We've seen it in other
I'm
places, right?
so that's one of my favorite things about
Yeah,
Shatterpoint. I love the lack of control that
and
exists there.
and it's not a new innovation. In fact, it in some ways you see it in Legion, right? Like there is imperfect control in Legion between the command cards and the order deck and the order tokens and how you randomize them. But Legion gives you the tools you need as a player to decide to either lean into the random nature of it or to plan in a way that you don't really feel it, right? Like if I maximize my core options and I take command cards that always make sure that I can assign the orders in my stack that are not my cores, I can be guaranteed to only draw my cores, or I can assign all my cores and know that my other ones are random, right? Like there are tools built in that make you able to manipulate the randomness. Shatterpoint goes in a different direction and says, hey, that's kind of neat, but what if we didn't give you those tools? Or we gave you very few tools, right? You get the reserve and you get the Shatterpoint card. And otherwise,
Right.
you're just stuck with what you get. How does that affect things and what does that do? So it's an innovation on things that we've already seen, but applied in ways that hopefully make it really unique and fun.
And I just want to say, I don't know if there's a question here, but I'm sure you can expound on something I say. That one of the other favorite mechanics, and this is also not new to Shatterpoint. I think there was a version of this, or maybe exactly the same in Crisis Protocol, is basically a character can never get wiped off the table before you get a chance to do anything with them.
Mm-hmm.
The way the damage, the wounds, and the injured works, they get to keep going until even in they're not dead until they get one last go. And I really love that. And I hear horror stories of people who play Warhammer and they spend a weekend or a week or a month painting their mini and they put them on the
Whole
table
army
and it gets
goes.
wiped out turn
Yeah.
one before you can get to play with it. And sometimes you feel that in Legion where like, oh, I just spent, I painted this whole squad of rebel troopers. I put a lot of little effort in each one. And now I take one wound and this guy's gone. And that's how the game works.
Mm-hmm.
And it's fine. But sometimes you're like, oh man, I painted that guy. I liked seeing him on the table. Now he's gone. And in Shatterpoint, it takes a lot of work to get a mini off the table. And I really like that. Like, it's not like you're not punished for taking damage, but it's not just, you don't get that bad feeling of, oh, they're immediately gone before I could react with them.
Freshly painted miniature syndrome is something that I think all veteran tabletop hobbyists have experienced, right? It's like, this is my brand new unit, freshly painted. They're clearly not going to do anything this game. I think lethality in Shatterpoint was one of the bigger things that we had to tackle at the start of the game, and how to make it work in a way that like attacking, because you have these stance charts, right? The combat system in Shatterpoint is the heart and soul of Shatterpoint. For me, that was the one thing that had to be there. And it was what the entire design was built around, was trying to take the idea of the combat trees from that we'd seen elsewhere and take it to its limit. Like really put all of the eggs in that basket and try to create a dynamic combat system that really told stories like we see on the screen, and to make combat feel dynamic and exciting and kinetic and all these things in a way that, we really hadn't experienced before or seen
like
come to
most
complete fruition.
most games an attack is I'm doing damage and you're negating some of it. And in Shatterpoint is, I'm trying to do damage, but I'm also doing a flip and I'm pushing you this way and I'm shouting at that guy over there to do a thing. And like, it's very action packed and dynamic. And like you said, there's so much more of a story happening even in that one little moment of the game.
Yeah, and so of course we had that, and I wasn't going to budge from that, no matter how much Pagani cried to me that maybe it wasn't going to work. I was convinced that we could do it, and the part that we had to balance in the equation was lethality. So, I think for everything that you talked about, right, having that character that you love and you just painted, putting it on the table and watching it get wiped off the board before it gets to do anything is just it's terrible. And it's made worse in a game like Shatterpoint, which is character driven and character focused. Those characters, like when you watch the Saturday morning cartoon, even the B1s don't disappear before they do something, right? They get to act in the story and then maybe they go away, but they always get to do something, right? They don't just show up and disappear because they got murdered straight away. So we knew from the start, kind of as just a general, and this goes back to one of our fundamental pillars that we all agree on when it comes to skirmish games at AMG, is that lethality has to be balanced around players getting to actually use their stuff. We want players to always have the opportunity to do something. With Crisis Protocol, that works in a way in which you can take a character from healthy to injured, but when you daze them, you can't affect them anymore. And then at the end of the round, a dazed character stands up and it's on its injured side. So you as the player typically have one chance, whether you choose to use it or not is up to you, to activate an injured character before it can be removed from the table. So it is possible that you as the player make a choice that says that character won't get to do anything because I'm going to not activate them first or early, and they'll go from injured to KO'd. With Shatterpoint, we explored a lot of different lethality options. We did really big health pools so that it just took a lot of attacks to take a character out. But that felt really bad because it was like, it just felt like a grind, right? Mm-hmm. Anakin has 36 hit points and the most you can do in an attack is 6. You have to attack him 6 times before you can remove him. Why am I bothering? Right? Like it takes so much effort that it wasn't satisfying. And that made combat feel kind of boring and stale. So we tried a bunch of different iterations, right? We tried balancing the amount of damage versus the amount of attacks versus when a character gets to go. It's a huge complex problem, and one that for Shatterpoint specifically, it was one of the hardest things that I've ever worked on in balancing in a game. The second thing in Shatterpoint that was super hard was figuring out how the objective and mission system works. But that's kind of true of all new game designs. Like figuring out how you win and how the balance for that goes is always kind of a bear. Lethality in this game was probably the worst and somewhat unexpected because we thought we would solve it pretty quick, but then we just didn't. We actually got to a point where we were just like, what if characters never die? What if you just can't kill them? Because we were already running into this place where like, if we tuned the lethality up, the characters were dying too fast. If we tuned the lethality down, they weren't dying anyway. So it was like, what if you just told players you can't kill a character and you just expect that going in? That you can slow them down. And that's where the wound and injury kind of mechanics came from originally, was, dealing damage and putting on wounds and all that stuff was still important because you removed them from scoring. You put more limitations on how much of their like abilities they could use because the force cost became intensive, all this stuff. You just couldn't kill them. And where we kind of wound up was that was working, but it still didn't feel quite right. And that was where the durability thing came up, and where injuries ultimately came out to matter the most. Was, okay, we'll give players the opportunity and the ability to remove characters or units from the game, but it's rare. It doesn't happen to everyone all the time, and it's somewhat difficult, and it ensures that these units get to do their thing and they get to have their last moment of heroics before they get removed. And when you remove something from the game, it feels very like, I did that. It feels really good. But if you have games, and I think many players will have games where nothing gets removed, but you've still dealt a lot of wounds to it, it doesn't feel like that was in vain, right? Like having units be wounded with the randomized order mechanic, not being able to score, is huge because you can play around that. You can develop emergent strategies where you're like, this character just went, I'm going to injure them, and I know that there's 4 cards left in the deck before the shuffle. So ideally, I might not have to, that character might not be unwounded for 7 turns, right? That's huge. you have no specific control over that, but you can play that way. You can also say, I'm not going to wound this character because they haven't been flipped yet. And if I wound them now, they'll just flip that to an injured token. Now, it might be worth it because you need to score that point. And then you're like, well, and then they'll have an injured token. So their force cost ability is like wounding a main character early, even before they activate, can be very useful because you put strain on your opponent's force resources, right? Because Anakin's force jump is now 2 instead of 1. That's huge. His double attack is now 3 instead of 2. That's half your force pool. So it really, like when we got there, it really unlocked all these really cool tactical decisions and larger strategies that you could employ. Well, making combat still a central focus, making damage still really important, and also making sure that the characters stayed around to be the characters that we all wanted to play with, right? And do the things that they do. And you always know that you're in a really good spot, I think, with a game when the negatives that you suffer as a player become enjoyable because they create things that you have to solve, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like negative experiences are not bad things. It goes back to the no, right? If you get told no on something, the only time it's not fun is if it's a nebulous, like you can't do it and we're not going to talk about it. And you're like, well, that sucks. But when it's a negative that you can then work around and innovate around and like figure out a clever way to make it a positive, that's exciting. And I think for me, and hopefully this proves out to be true for most people, where lethality and the wound and injury system in Shatterpoint wound up is that those negatives, they hurt. You're like, I don't want to take wounds, but they're also an opportunity to be clever and to turn that negative into a positive in the best way that you can. And when you do that, you get that dopamine hit that says, I'm a smart person and this was great. I can't wait to do it again.
I really like that I was able to just mention one of my favorite mechanics and hear the whole story of how the behind the scenes development ideas. I absolutely love that. That's so great. Thank you for that. And I think, unless Kurt, do you have anything else, or Will, do you have any other gems you'd like to share about Shatterpoint? I think that might take us to the end of this interview.
I will leave it up to Kurt to ask one last question to keep me on for the next 30 minutes because I won't stop talking. But
that's fine.
Otherwise,
we should call it there then.
Yeah, I will happily come. I will save some of the gems for the next time I get to join you, fine fellas.
Awesome, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Will Shick. Congratulations on the already success of Shatterpoint, a game that's not even out yet. And thank you for joining us. Thank you for all of that wisdom and tidbits and love of Cad Bane. And thanks, Kurt, for being here.
You're welcome.
And is there any plugs you want to do? Obviously, people know they should go by Shatterpoint, but if they want to find your Twitter or whatever, if there's anything like that you want to share.
No, the biggest thing, best way to find information on the games is, of course, watch the Atomic Mass studio or game social media. So Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. And then if you want to hang out and chat and listen to more random discussions about game theory, philosophy, hobby stuff, we do live streams every Tuesday and Wednesday. Most of those streams are us, like myself or our creative director, Dallas Kemp, painting. So if you want to see the next miniature, kind of see our approach to painting it, it's always great. We love just chatting. We'll answer questions from the chat as we can or just be goofy. The last stream that Dallas was on, he did his Tusken Raider and Chewbacca noises. So he was doing his impressions for both of those. It was intense. He had to take off his mic for the Tusken Raider one. So we just like to hang out. Sometimes there's good tidbits on those. Sometimes there's just nonsense. I don't know. Mostly it's a great way to just kind of hang and be a community together, which we love doing. So you can always check those out. That's on Twitch, Tom Mass Games, Tuesdays and Wednesdays at 1 p.m. Pacific. And otherwise, I really appreciate you all having me on. It was a blast to get to chat. I love talking about all this nonsensical philosophy and game design and everything else. And I hope everyone is excited for June 2nd. It's going to be a good time.
I am hyped. I got my pre-orders in.
For sure.
Thanks everybody for tuning in. I hope you all enjoyed this. Please tell us what you're most excited about for Shatterpoint, or who your favorite character is, or feel free to answer any of the questions we asked Will in the comments yourself. Maybe not, some of those things won't make sense because you don't work for Atomic Mass Games, but whatever. Got to drive the engagement. that's the secret that YouTubers don't tell you when they ask for comments, is it's about feeding the algorithm. Anyways, thanks so much, Will, for joining us. Thanks everybody for watching, and we'll see you all next time.